Episode 9. Welcome to episode 9. Now, episode 9 has ended up in 2 parts, so it's becoming episode 9 and 10 because the massive story time that is really intense and something I've been avoiding and not wanting to talk about because it's really emotional and full on. Well, that ended up being longer than a whole episode. So I had no choice but to split it. This episode, there is a story time in it. There's a couple of story times in it. And next episode is one massive story time. This one is so important to listen to before next week. And that's how it's going to be. Hopefully next week when you come back, you'll remember all about this week. But if not, come back and listen. And I'm really disappointed I couldn't put it all in one, but literally, like, who is going to listen to hours? There's one podcaster I used to listen to and their content's really good, but the episodes went for like hours and I tuned out and I'd miss out on so much information, and it was really a struggle for me to get through an episode and I'd still give up halfway. So if you're anything like me, let's keep it short and snappy. Well, it's not really short. These episodes are going longer than they really should. Oh, and when I first recorded it, I recorded it as if I didn't know it was in 2 parts, so I don't know if I say anything during it. But there's so much content. There's so many story times, so much tea, so much to fit in 2 episodes. So let's get into it. Today is called Justice System Flaws. Now, what is that even about? The justice system does very well at times at literally saving our lives, at making things better, and putting offenders in prison. However, that is not always the case. Anyone who has been through DV may have a story. I've heard countless from survivors about when they get it wrong. So that's what today's about. The reason for this episode is so that no one feels alone, condemned at any time. Because part of abuse is to feel isolated, to feel condemned, to feel everything's your fault, to have your self-esteem put through a blender and grinded down to a pulp. So if you hear other people have had these experiences, I'm hoping that you will feel better and therefore empowered, like everyone should feel. Everyone should be empowered and free of abuse. So let's get into it. So when looking into research for this episode, I found so much. I was surprised at how much was out there, and even evidence-based journal articles about studies. It was overwhelming and very good to see. So initially, I found some from my country, and I thought I'd read an article out from theguardian.com, which is a newspaper, but it was found online. And this article is about the state I lived in when I went through some very bad crimes from a perpetrator of abuse. So that's quite fitting. The article is titled Queensland Police Misidentify Domestic Violence Victims as Attackers, Inquiry Told. It says Queensland Police, so Queensland's a state in Australia. Queensland Police regularly misidentify the victims of domestic violence, with a lawyer telling an inquiry that a woman was subjected to a protection order due to scratches she inflicted in self-defense when her partner was strangling her. In another case, officers wrongly identified a deaf First Nations woman as a perpetrator despite making no effort to communicate with her. A lawyer from the Queensland Indigenous Family Violence Legal Service told the inquiry. So they had an actual legal inquiry into this, and it's odd because I had nothing to do with it despite documented evidence that a very unsafe error was made for me, which I will get into later in the episode. It's pretty full on, so stay tuned for that. So let's read on. There will be a woman there. She will otherwise be covered in blood. She might be holding an instrument. They, police officers, will see a man sitting there very quiet and calm. They will go to him and speak with him. She will become probably irate. They will then treat her as the aggressor. I just know that from the survivors I've talked to, women, if you cry, they think you're the aggressor. If you cry or show emotion, they see that as aggression and being not good. So it doesn't mean she's going, rah, at the police, but she might be showing lots of emotion, lots of not positive emotion, and he's sitting there calmly, so they're like, oh, he's the good one. No. It goes on to say, it is not uncommon on a weekly basis for First Nations clients to approach us seeking assistance because they have been turned away from police stations when they make complaints of domestic and family violence. There is another instance where a lawyer told the Inquiry of a case where police treated a victim with disbelief, like they would not believe her, and refused to apply for a protection order on her behalf. This was despite the perpetrator's long history of violence against his former partner. So he had a long history of domestic violence, recorded, documented. Because something is always recorded with the police, they can access things that aren't criminal record. Criminal record is what your employers can kind of seek if you fill out a specific form. But police can see all police kind of dealings by looking you up on their little iPads and computers. So he already had a long history with other victims, and they still refused to believe that he was a perpetrator or listen to her. She applied for a protection order herself, and they warned her, well, we're going to go and tell him this and blah, 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 and increase her risk of violence. There's a quote that says, there's lots of talk about motorbikes in the backyard, lots of mate conversations. Look, I don't know what the motorbike reference is, but the mate conversations, the men, and this is part of what happened to me, will go over to the police and be like, yeah, mate, yeah, no worries, mate. No, it's all good. Oh, you know, women, mate. Oh, they're hysterical. They're horrible bitches, mate. Yeah, mate. No, I'm chill. No, it's all good, mate. They have these and that kind of talk in Australia is just men sort of bonding, and they do that, mate. Yeah, how you going, mate? Talk to manipulate the police to think, oh, he's a good guy. Yeah, no, he's all right. And this last line is literally me as well. She said that she would never call the police again. After what happened to me, I was in this same position, and things got really, really bad much later, and I had to walk into a police station and say, I want to call for help because he was able to manipulate you. I can't, please. How can I get help? How can I call police and you come and actually listen to me when I call for help? Next time I call 000, I'd like you to listen to me and know he's a manipulator and just listen. And it took me going in during the day, asking that question to start actually receiving help and be listened to. So it's a bit crappy. There is more. That's just a Queensland in Australia article. So the justicegap.com is a magazine. I initially thought it was American, but it turns out it's from the UK. It says, we're a magazine about law and justice and the difference between the two. They have an article titled 6 out of 10 women in prison are victims of domestic abuse, says a new report. Now, they have a Centre for Women's Justice, and they focus on the unjust criminalisation of victims of violence against women and girls. And it says that they are calling for new provisions to be added to the domestic abuse bill to address gaps in the law. They want an amendment to the law on self-defense to allow survivors acting in self-defense against their abuser the same protection as householders. So what this means is if someone breaks into your home, I'm assuming in the UK, you have a legal right to defend yourself. So they're saying a victim of DV should have the same legal right. I had someone break in my home, hold me hostage. I had no legal right to defend myself. I had access to a knife. If I had used that knife, I would be 1, the perpetrator, 2, charged with all the things, whatever injuries that he got, assault, grievous bodily harm, whatever, and I would have been had a criminal record and been punished. It is so frustrating. I do believe in Australia, if someone breaks into your home, it might not be the same as the UK. I know it's not the same as the US. Like, you're not allowed to kill someone if they break in your home here. You are still liable for what harm you do to them. You are allowed to use enough force to get them out of your home, maybe pushing. But if you do any major damage, And so when your DV perpetrator breaks into your home, like happened to me, I didn't have a legal right to use a knife to get out. So my life was in his hands, and he had to choose if he killed me or not, because I couldn't pick up a knife. If I did, he would have loved it, because he would have if I even held a knife, I think he'd probably try and run at it to get himself injured so he could go, I'm the victim now, you're stuffed, you're going to lose your nursing registration, you're going to lose your job, you're stuffed, you'll now have a criminal record, you're welcome. Because he was that determined. So I knew I could not use a knife to get out of the house, and my life was in his hands. And that's really, really unfair. When he has a weapon on him, every man carries a weapon. It's called testosterone that increases their muscle mass. Anyone who's been around men know they can pick you up. If you are the same size as a man, their strength outweighs you. They can pick you up, they can restrain you and hold you down. They have so much strength. So men carry that natural weapon of having strength over women on them 24/7. And it is illegal in my country to have pepper spray. You can have no kind of self-defense, anything here. And it's really disappointing because I would really like to be on par or nearly on par with a man's weapon, their muscle mass. And the only thing that held me hostage when I was held hostage was his male muscle mass compared to my female muscle mass. I could have got a knife at one point and I really wanted to, but I know the law here and I know how it works and I know how domestic violence law works. And even just reading this in the UK, they want domestic violence victims to be able to use self-defense like they would a home intruder. So I'm so glad I made the decision not to use it. But that means I had to not get out of a hostage situation. I had to allow him to beat me, give me head injuries, strangle me and nearly murder me because I had access to a knife but I couldn't use it. And it's like, why, when someone breaks into your home and holds you hostage and is violent towards you and you're not toward them, why are we not allowed to then use any means necessary, any weapon we can get our hands on to get out of that house and run away? It's very disappointing. So I love that in the UK they have the Centre for Women's Justice that is looking to change that. It makes sense. I had assumed we could defend, but we know we can't. If you're a victim of domestic violence, they still see it as a two-way street, as a couple having an issue, and they still say, well, you're allowed to sort of push them away, but no, you can't even like push them away if you have nails. You know how murder victims have like DNA under their nails? So because they're trying to push them away and get them off them, in that time they scratch them, well, then you'll be condemned for any scratches on them. It seems they can do whatever they want to you, and anything you do to try and survive, if any harm is done to their body at all, you are liable. It does need to change, and I love that this organisation is trying to do that. Oh, it's so sad, isn't it? And we have number 2, www.biscmi.org. BISCMI? Now, they mention a study and reference other studies and concluded that women imprisoned or accused of being the perpetrator of domestic abuse are often the victim reacting, that's reactive abuse, or self-defense against their abuser. They also acknowledge how many are incarcerated due to this, and many lose custody of their children as well. This is so good, this biscmi.org, because they also made note that many perpetrators manipulate authorities to see their victim as their abuser as a means of maintaining and exerting power and control over the victim. They mention the well-documented statistics that women are the majority of victims of domestic abuse. I found so very many journal articles, research studies and documents online around this issue, more than I expected. There was an Australian one from the ABC that said women in prisons are domestic violence victims as well. So this is a worldwide issue, that there are women in prison for being domestic violence victims and trying to survive, or trying to be on par with these naturally physically stronger men and trying to get them off them and get them away and making decisions in those moments. And there were so many times through my abuse where I had to be really smart and think, okay, so if I do this, what's the consequences? What's the consequences with the law? What's the consequences with him twisting everything and manipulating authorities? And I had to make so many quick judgment calls. In these situations he put me in, he put everyone in, he had the control over all this crap, psycho, bullcrap abuse. He could have just not abused anyone and walked away. But he put me in all these situations, and I had to make judgment calls really quickly on my feet. And I can see that so many women would have made different judgment calls at different times, and I could have made different ones at different times, and they end up in prison easily. It's very disturbing, and it has to change. I'm going to share from survivors I've met some general stories, no names, just things I've been told by survivors over the years. Now, probably 90% of the survivors I've talked to had DV orders placed on them as the respondent, as the perpetrator. They were either revenge orders in response to a police order on the perpetrator, or a private order on the perpetrator, or the perpetrator got in first. But majority that I spoke to, they were revenge orders. So the police in a domestic violence incident, when called there, would get a domestic violence order, protection order, against the perpetrator. And these women would then, weeks later, get served as an offender of domestic violence that they then had to go to court. And he got an order against his victim. So that means she's lost her power to call the authorities when he does something wrong, because he'll go, well, I've got an order too, so I'll just lie and you'll go to prison, or you'll get charged with assault. I'll make up what I want, where it puts them on an equal playing field. Now, this brings me to a very important point that I was talking to a court lawyer, a lawyer who works for the courts and works for both perpetrators and victims of DV at their DV court days. She told me about 10 years plus ago, when a perpetrator was given an order, they were often offered by the court to get one on their victim, or encouraged to get one on their victim. That the mindset back then was cross orders, which means both parties have an order as the perpetrator. These cross orders, they believe, well, that will protect everyone. If everyone has an order, then everyone's protected. Then I guess studies, many deaths and loss of women's lives in domestic violence in this country, and things happened, and over time they realised they were wrong. Only in recent years, magistrates now, the majority of them do not push for cross orders. Now the thinking is who is at most need of protection, in trying to determine who's the actual victim here, who's the vulnerable party who needs this order to protect them finally. And I can vouch for the ex from many, many, many years ago, they were offered the cross order application in court when the police got an order against them. So this person from years and years and years ago, the worst thing they ever did was punch me in the face, and I thought that was the worst DV ever, until at some stage with the more of a psychopath person. But this ex from a long time ago told me, yes, when they went to court with the police. So I regret calling the police when I was punched in the face and bleeding from the lip. It was instinctual because that's what you're meant to do, and I was confused and scared and unsure and unsafe. So I called for help when that happened, and I've regretted it every day since, because the police said, we will get an order against him. And I said, please don't. This person is full of revenge. This person is very into revenge. They will hurt me. They will get me back. They will make sure I pay if you get this order on me. And they said, well, too bad. I told them I'm going to be at risk if, and this isn't my story, by the way, for today. This is just like a side quest, This is just another, and you're like, oh, there's a lot. I've had a life. Yeah, so I told the police, well, I'm not going to court. And they're like, well, you should, because otherwise they might just get a B of good behaviour and they won't be so many metres away and do this and do that. And I said, I'm not going. I don't want this. And I have to show them this is not me doing it. It's you doing it. I do not want this order. I guarantee you They will get revenge. They will get me back for this. Please don't do that. Well, too bad. We're doing it. So they went to court. He was at court. I wasn't there. I was hoping that would show that I don't want any part of this. No. And in court, he was able to then apply for a cross order against me. And back then, all that time ago, it was very easily done. I fought it. I bought a lawyer and I was like, I'm not the perpetrator and I will not be treated as a perpetrator and I will not have this order. There is no reason for it. He lied. It kept getting adjourned and there was so many, like it went over months because they just kept adjourning it. So many opportunities to take photos. Some of the lies were I'd punched holes in walls. Little did the court know the house was double brick. And if you know what double brick is where the inside walls are brick and the outside walls are brick. So there's no plasterboard or anything. He's like, oh, she punched holes in the walls. They were brick. But he just said, oh yeah, she did that. And I'm like, wouldn't you bring a photo or have a photo on a phone to sort of show or something like that? No photo. And the thing with domestic violence orders is you don't need evidence. It's a civil thing. So it's just kind of like oh, well, they said that, so we'll just, take that into account. But there's never a request for actual evidence. But I was determined not to because I knew if he got it, what he would do. In the end, the magistrate said, well, I'm just going to give it to him anyway. Then you've both got one. And I cried. And he said, what's the problem? Like, it doesn't mean anything, doesn't go on your record. Like, this is no big deal, and it's just a big good behavior. Like, it doesn't mean anything. This will never impact you. That's the biggest lie. It impacted me. The lawyer I got was really shocked, by the way. He said that magistrate must hate women. He clearly hates women because looking at this whole thing, there is no reason he should have done that. He used that to control me. And back then they were only 2 years, now they're 5 years for the duration of it. I could never use the police one. He broke into my property and I had to hide while he's banging on all like the back door, like all walking through the backyard and everything. And I was terrified. And then he would say, if you don't do what I want, if you don't do this, I'll say you're not being of good behavior. And if I didn't do what he wanted, he would threaten the order and imply that he would say I was being rude and that's abuse, and held it over me, and it negated the one I had. So it just sort of gave him power to control me, and it was horrible. And my then psychopath, at a later stage in my life, they knew this because I'm that open person. You share about your life, what you've been through, and they use that as one of their tools to convince police, look, she has a history. She's had an order against her in the past. She's a violent woman. He made sure he used the word woman because it's degrading and it implies that whole hysterical woman thing. And now that it's changed in the last, I don't know how long, decade or however, that they are trying to give the order to the correct person. Any orders from before that when victims got them routinely, now police who've just come out of the academy, which was actually the case of what happened in my situation, they now think, oh, well, if there is one, they must have been violent and bad, not realising that back then it was routine. Victims had orders against them. And it's so shameful. Like, I haven't told anyone about the cross order thing. And so when I did speak to domestic violence victims, I found that, now 90% of them had a history of having orders from their perpetrators. It's slowly decreasing because they are now finally looking for who to give it to. And when the man applies for a cross order, which did happen with this person, they don't get it because they have to see who needs it, because now they're slowly realizing the perpetrators use it to continue to abuse their victim, and then they use it to prove to police, look, they've got an order on them as a perpetrator. They've got documented evidence that they're a perpetrator of domestic violence. And it's so good that they're finally changing it, but they have to realize the time that happened, and any woman, any victim of DV that has any history of having a cross order on them from before that, They need to know that that's because victims were given orders routinely and often back in the day. At the time, no one talks about it. Victims don't talk about it. So at the time when it happened, I thought I was the only one. I felt horrible. I thought, why did they believe the lies? Why did they just say it means nothing? I'm now... It was heartbreaking. It was horrible. And this isn't even my story about today. Like today, it's worse. Well, it kind of led into it a bit actually there for a moment. But I'm going to come back to what I was saying. But it is very important, and I'm glad that the magistrates and the justice system are slowly seeing that cross orders is not healthy or helpful, that it is best to give the protection to the person who needs it and not give any extra power to a perpetrator, considering perpetrators are the ones seeking power and control. So other things that survivors had told me over the years: one had described how her ex-husband lied to police and ambulance officers that she was suicidal and a risk to herself. So being a risk to yourself or others can get you admitted to a psych ward against your will. And this is what happened to her. Now, at this stage, I had known how many attempts an abuser I had made to do the same to me. But knowing that abusers are often successful at selling the idea that their victim is mentally ill, suicidal, or the old-fashioned hysterical woman picture. It's thanks to the patriarchy that husbands could tell doctors, traditionally, generations ago, they could tell doctors their wives were complaining, and then that women were diagnosed with hysteria. And those values continue through that misogyny, and in women internalized misogyny, it continues today. So when a man who is calm and confident reports that a crying woman is suicidal and hysterical, they are often more respected and believed over the woman. Now, this sexism and misogyny needs to end, and it will in time, but it continues to this day that men have power and control over women in that they get more respect than women. There are many male perpetrators out there who say, if they're a woman, they just say hit them because women are usually the victims and it's not fair to be a man. And I get emotional about this because I used to. And don't get me wrong, especially where substance use is involved, because having worked in mental health, I've seen many violent women, and it is the majority of cases there's substance use involved. But some, it's not, it's genuine mental illness. The thing that changed for me was when I was held hostage and the only weapon he had was his natural male muscle mass over my female muscle mass. It made me realize in genuine abuse cases, the victim, instead of this he said, she said bullcrap and these games that abusers love to play and the drama abusers love, in genuine cases, you want to get away from your abuser. You want to flee. You want to get out the front door. You want to run. And when I was held hostage and the only weapon he used was his natural male muscle mass, I changed my entire point of view on the men versus women debate. And when I heard Johnny Depp saying I had to hide, I was scared, and I'm like, I went back to what happened to me when I was held hostage, and I saw that he was male, he was skinny, but bigger than her and had male muscle mass, and she's this tiny actress, Hollywood actresses. And I know he could have literally lifted her to the side and gained access to the door and got free. But he played all these little games and all these little, I was so scared. If you were genuinely scared for your life, you can get out of the room. You can escape. And I don't want to get into that thing because people get quite passionate about that whole subject. But if you can get free, and men have physical power and control over women. So having been in that hostage situation and nearly murdered because I don't have the same strength as a man, really changed my whole mindset on men and victims of DV. I know there are very unwell women or very substance abusing women out there who can be horrible and not very nice people. With every single body of people, there is an exception for everything. However, if you can get free, if you can get out the front door, if you can push that person off you and get away, and in Australia we don't have guns, so it is about unarmed combat. So a woman might throw something against the room, like in that Johnny Depp Amber Heard case, they might throw something. But if that man is genuinely scared, he can get out of the room. He can get past her. He can push her to the side, get to the door and run out. I couldn't because I'm a girl, because I don't have muscle mass that my perpetrator had, and that's the only weapon he used, and that's the balance of power. They're carrying their weapon on them, and our government tells us we can't even have pepper spray. You must be weaker than a man at all times and have no chance of defending yourself. You can walk down the street and a man can just grab you and pick you up and you can't fight him off. Let us have frickin' pepper spray. Far out. Let us have something that puts us almost on par with them. We don't want to hurt them. We do not want to hurt our abusers. We have no desire to hurt anyone. We don't have that in us. We want to get safe, our children safe, our home safe, us safe, and mentally safe and physically safe. We want to get away. So excuse that rant, but it's just all part of the justice system problem. So that woman, that survivor who told me that, I'd spent some time with her, and that could have been me. And he threatened, I'm going to call an ambulance and tell him you're going to kill yourself. That victim who went to hospital, and as I know how it works, is you go to hospital, and if you're in there over the weekend, you've got to wait till Monday to see a psychiatrist. So if you go in hospital with an order where you legally can't leave, you have to wait until a psychiatrist sees you before she could say, I'm not a risk to myself or others, I'm fine, he lied. This is him using the health system as a weapon against me because I stood up and said, I don't like your abuse, I want to leave you. She had to convince them of of the truth. And so she did get out of hospital at that point. But the fact that her husband had the power and control to do that, she said at the time, she was saying, no, I'm fine. Like, no, but they didn't believe her. And it really depends on the police officers and ambulance officers at the time if they're going to believe you, who's sitting there going, no, I'm not, I'm fine. If a woman shows emotion at a scene, that's really not good for them. That's something I learned a long time ago, that police, and I've sort of observed them in my work as well, that police think emotion is a sign that person's a perpetrator, is a sign of mental illness. But when you think about psychopaths, serial killers, they're the calm creepers. And that's something that, a lot of these articles I saw are saying, hey, look at the calm one. The person who's crying is reacting as a normal human brain reacts to a very, very unsettling, disturbing situation. You don't have police in your house every day. It's terrifying. So the person who is emotional is the one reacting like, this is really weird. The person calm, it's like, why are you calm? Anyone out there who's a victim, I know it's a highly emotional situation when the police finally do come, but try and articulate what you need to say and be as calm as you can because of that prejudice. I love it that in this generation it has become evident and people are learning that emotion shown as aggression or punching holes in walls or being violent is weak, and emotion shown as crying, general distress and verbalizing issues is strength. I love that women are now calling men out for being emotional. When I grew up, men being aggressive and violent was strength, and getting revenge on people was strength, and just being violent in general was strength. Now that's weakness. You punch a hole in a wall, you've got some emotional issues, you're being very emotional. If the woman standing next to you is crying, she's processing in a very healthy way, in the correct way the brain has been designed to function. Using violence is the weakest shit in the world. People who use violence and aggression to express emotion are weak. People who cry and speak about what's going on and show visible signs of emotion are healthy individuals processing emotion the correct way. Never let anyone tell you the opposite. And ever since that's become apparent, and I love that on TikTok, people are going, boys are so emotional, men are so emotional, because they've always said, women are so emotional, they're so weak. And it's now like, actually, bitch, you were wrong. I love seeing that on TikTok. It's really good. So it will take time for these more accurate values and ways of thinking to take over society, and in time they will. So just be out there, still spread it. And ever since I've sort of seen that new way of thinking, on social media. I viewed violent men in such a different way now. Men who are just violent, aggressive, use aggression to sort of get by in the world and have opinions with their whole chest, and use aggression to sort of get what they want and push ahead of others and push ahead of women and be little bitches. I basically have viewed them so differently. I used to view violent men as scary and more powerful, but I've just learnt so much, and it's thanks to all of you. It's thanks to social media, and because it's thanks to that now me and so many more have viewed, hey, if you're going to be violent, you've got some emotional issues, dude, and you're weak. And I now see any man who disrespects a woman in any way as a very, very weak human, because I've seen amazing men that are feminists, and some don't even know they're a feminist. They just have that natural respect. They were raised with that respect. And it emulates this strength and this beauty. It's just beautiful to see that. And there are so many wonderful men like that out there. So when I see these men degrading women sexually or with violence and disrespect, those men I see as weak. I actually see them as weak little bitches. I have empathy for them because I think you've got a lot of issues. You've been raised that you're not allowed to express emotion, which is crappy for you, but now you are. So get it out. Go home, have a cry, release, go get some therapy. I love that there's this post on TikTok that says, I'm going to tell men on dates, like, get in the car, we're going somewhere. It's a surprise, and drop them off at a therapist or something like that. And I love that we're seeing it for what it is now, that these people need help. They are not well, they are weak, and we need to help them. They are not these strong aggressors, and throwing your weight around with aggression is weak. Like now, I was in a queue in a supermarket and a man was being aggressive to the staff. I just looked at him like, you're being a little bitch. Like, I see them as weak now, these shriveled up, weak, little scared boys, not these scary, strong aggressors, because they're physically stronger, so keep your distance, because they're not stable either, so keep your distance. But we are all starting to view it differently, and let's lift the men up who are strong, who are fighting the good fight for respect for everyone, for equality for everyone, and help these little bitches get the therapy they need, which they will, if you know an abuser or anyone that fits that description, they would be very resistant to it because pride and ego. But over time that will change, and things are changing. They're just changing very slowly, and we're in the generation where things aren't going to change in my lifetime too much more, but we're setting it up for future generations, which is what it's all about. Now, because next week is one huge story time, even though I've shared some story time things in this episode, I wanted to add this other one because it's so relevant to the subject. And it's just a really quick one I wanted to throw in the end here, but it just shows how in different scenarios, different people, the justice system is still flawed when it comes to domestic violence and violence against women. So where I was living at some stage, there was a road and a car pulled up on the side of the road, and you could hear screaming and shouting, and I tried to ignore it, and the screaming was really triggering and reminded me of horrible things. Eventually I couldn't ignore it, like it just kept going on and on and on. So I went to a place where I could see the road from where I was, and a woman was being abused by a man, physically, like beaten. So there were close neighbours where I was, and there were men that lived there, but none of them went out, and I know everyone could have heard it. Like, it was so full on, it was so loud, so distressing. No one went out. It felt like it was on me to go out, but I just couldn't, because I knew that I could get dragged into it somehow, and being female, he could, I would become part of it, and he could then go for me. And I was like, where are they? Like, where are the men? Like, a man walks up to a situation like that, the abuser's gonna like possibly pull his head in and stop it, whereas a woman does, they're just going to drag you into it and make it your problem, and you could be at risk too. So I called the police and I described the situation, and it was pretty graphic and horrible what was going on. in this car, and really distressing and really triggering for me. But I did it because I wanted to do the right thing. I wanted to be anonymous and not get involved, but this person needed help. It turns out I was the only one who called, which is disgusting. It's so disgusting. And you know what happened? So the 000 person's like, oh yeah, there's police in the area, they'll be there soon. And 4 hours later, a police officer from his desk calls me and goes, yeah, they're not there anymore, are they? And I went, yeah, don't worry, it's just a woman. That wasn't the first thing I said, by the way. It was one of the last things I said in response to him being quite cruel. I was very lovely to him and polite on the phone, and then it was towards the end I dropped that, okay, it doesn't matter, it's just a woman, in frustration for the attitude he had and the way he was speaking about the woman and what was happening and to me, and he had that whole boys club mentality. So I just want you to know and make it clear that I didn't just drop the, oh, it's just a woman, like straight away. That was right at the end of the conversation in response to the way this police officer was on the phone after he phoned me. Like, I was so pissed at the system because they knew this woman was being injured, was being harmed, was in the car of a perpetrator, was screaming for help. I, having been through things myself, was in no place to help and get involved, but I called saying, please come and help her. The 000 person said, do not approach, they're coming. They lied. And the police went, oh, a woman's being like killed or abused. Priority bottom, Z. Or I know priority 1 is like lights and sirens, but like they put it to the lowest priority and went, yeah. Rang me from his desk later, just before he ended his shift. Oh yeah, they've gone now. Like, it's over now, isn't it? Like, yeah, he's probably buried her body by now. Yeah, you're good. You don't have to come out. Like, what? That is so disgusting that the system still thinks violence against women that's actively happening. And they never said at any point that anything was busy. This guy's just sitting in his chair in his office. Like, they never, according to 000, they could have come. They were nearby, but they decided not to. And I definitely conveyed the information accurately. And it really triggered me to see this other woman needed help and that the police refused to help her. And you can't tell me 4 hours later going, oh yeah, like 4 hours later. So they were there for so long. They were there for so long that the police could have taken their time but still made it. This woman was being abused physically and in every way and screaming, and no one helped her. No people around, no one else called. And they spoke to me like I was like an idiot on the phone. But I know what I saw and I know how I conveyed it and handed it over. And it was really, really disappointing that the system doesn't just let down people I've talked to, survivors I've talked to, or myself. But even in situations like that, when you call 000, actively seeing a woman being beaten, screaming for help, they don't even bother coming. So that's another story. And I really didn't want to be involved in that. I didn't want that to happen. I was like, of course, that's happening. I knew you've got to call. So please, everyone out there, if there is a neighbour and they are calling for help and you hear noise, please call police. My neighbours, when I was held hostage, that would be a whole episode actually, they were very nosy. Yet they didn't call for help, and I know they heard when I was held hostage because I made so many attempts to get out and I used my voice whenever I could. They did nothing, not a thing. And I know he had talked to them, so I'm assuming he convinced them I was crazy. And if you hear any noise, she's just mentally ill or something like that, probably. Please, if you hear anyone, just call. And it's not on us if the police don't come, but at least you've done all you can to help. Not calling like, oh, I don't want to get involved. I don't want to get involved, but I had to make that call. You can say, I want to stay anonymous, but you have to put that call through. You have to. Because you don't know what's going on. You don't know if they're held hostage. You don't know if they're being raped, beaten, threatened, if their children are involved. You don't know. You need to do the call. And hopefully one day the system is better and women who are being actively beaten on the streets are important enough for the police to come Usually 000 is pretty good. They're like, oh, it's a bit busy or whatever, but they were not even telling me it was busy or anything like that. But yeah, really disappointing, and it was really triggering just to see that reinforcement that how low on the priority list a woman being beaten on the side of the road is. So eventually, ages later, the perpetrator drove off with her in the car, and who knows what happened, but she obviously was still stuck in that abuse because she never had an opportunity to get out of it. Like, he still had her. Who knows what he did with her. The amount of deaths we have in Australia in domestic violence situations, it's huge. Hopefully she's alive and well. It's horrible. So that's just an add-on story there for this episode. But next week is the big one. It's the one where I talk about how the justice system let me down, how when police got it wrong, and it's a really full-on share. Like, this is full on. Tune in next week. Episodes drop Thursday mornings in Australia, and the equivalent of that everywhere else in the world. I think we're in the future, so that could be Wednesday afternoon or evening or something. Other places of the world, just keep an eye out. If you subscribe on YouTube, you get notified, don't you? If you follow, it comes up on your little screen in Spotify, so don't miss next week, especially after listening this week. It's huge, and I still feel a bit about sharing, but if we are all brave and we all share and we take away the silence, because the silence is what gives perpetrators of abuse power, and the silence is what gives a broken system power. And if we all have a voice and all come out and talk about it, we take away that power. And you can see that happening in the media now. Have a voice, shout it loud. Talk to you next week. See you, legends. Love ya. Stay safe. Bye.